Make sure to start the recording.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Glen J. Benedict. I am the Access Services Librarian at the University of the District of Columbia, and welcome to my session. This is the way intellectual freedom outreach at pop culture conventions. And I'm very excited to see so many of you were able to make it out today. So let me just go through this. I started recording. Before I get started, I just want to thank San Jose State University. They are the founding partner of this conference. And so we just want to make sure that they are recognized as such. So this is the agenda of what I'd like to discuss today. So first, I want to talk about why do this sort of advocacy and outreach at fan conventions. How do you know which convention to choose? What topic should you discuss? And then finally, I want to talk about crafting a call to action, because that really is going to be the key part of whatever you are doing. Is you want to start with, what do you want the people who interact with you at this convention, whether you have a booth, whether you're doing a presentation or a panel or a poster or an activity, what do you want the attendees of this convention to take away? So we're going to talk about that at the end. So to start with, I want to sort of talk about, just really briefly, my experiences with doing this, because this is something that I have, like most of you who are probably in the at this presentation, I'm a librarian. I've worked in libraries for several years. I'm involved with ALA and with sort of intellectual freedom activities and committees. And for me, those are all great things. But for me, a lot of it felt like librarians talking to librarians about librarianship with other librarians. And so this is a way, there's obviously lots of different ways of taking the message that we've been discussing and crafting and intellectualizing for years, and bringing it to the people that really need to hear it, our library patrons, our constituents, our community. So that is, so in terms of what I personally have done, I have talked about book banning and sort of giving a history on that at FlameCon. I did that last year. FlameCon is a LGBTQ themed, pop culture nerdy convention that's held in New York City. And this year I'll be speaking at FlameCon again, and I'll also be speaking at AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C., which is where I live. AwesomeCon is much, much bigger. And so I'm really excited, a little nervous. And I've been talking to friends who do this, people who have talked at San Diego Comic-Con, at New York Comic-Con, at other sort of big shows, talking about this and bringing intellectual freedom messages to a much broader constituency. So why conventions? And so there are kind of three main reasons why I would say, why should you seek out these as avenues for intellectual freedom, discourse, and advocacy. So first off is, if you're at a local show, you are interacting with your local community. You're doing immediately relevant outreach. You are talking with people, especially if you're talking about book bans, you are talking about protecting freedom of access to information for people who are really excited about information. They're already passionate about something. And so part of, your job is going to be, how are you going to relate what the attendees of this conference are passionate about to your message? Sometimes it's an easy fit, sometimes it might not be. But that's sort of what your job is going to be. And you're also reaching people who might be in your community, but might not normally be affiliated with your library. They might not know that the local library is there. They might never have visited it. They might not know what kind of services and media stuff that you offer, what activities, what programming you offer at the library. So it's good outreach for your institution. It is a collaborative opportunity, both for within and without your institution. You can bring together coworkers. Some really good positions to try to bring into this is going to be if you have an outreach librarian or somebody who handles their social media, somebody whose job is to enhance patron experience. Your selection, your library workers who do selection, especially in the children, teen, and YA spaces. But in general, just, this is a great way of doing market research. What is the new manga series that everybody is really excited about? Is there a new show that's on the horizon that, you can order DVDs for your library? What's the hot new book series? So it's a great way to sort of gauge for you to involve other parts, other people that work in your library. You can also bring in other library groups. If you have book clubs, if you have band book clubs, that's be really great. If you have an involved Friends of the Library group, if you have parents and students or other patrons who want to talk about the way that your institution has helped protect their freedom to access information, how they've helped them protect their personal data if you have a privacy program. It just doesn't have to be just you doing this. You can bring in, you can do it can be a really collaborative effort. Finally, it's fun. You are getting a chance to interact with people in a relaxed, less confrontational atmosphere. It's not, library board meetings or school board meetings where tensions are running high and, groups are coming in to picket and to protest. You can talk about these sort of things in a proactive way. You are building your community support. If you don't have these issues yet in your communities, you're helping to, build your supporter base before these challenges come to your institution. And your marketing, like I said, with getting your outreach people involved, you're marketing the library as something that's fun, something that's responsive, and something that's welcoming. You are meeting your patrons where they are, and you're showing that you are interested in what they're interested in. Another thing too is if you want to talk about in terms of impacts and where the people are, these numbers I got, I will be perfectly frank, I do not know how accurate these numbers are, especially the New York Comic Con ones. There is some debate as to how each of these groups does their head counts. These are the numbers that are reported by each of these. So ALA is the largest, library convention. Gen Con is at least this is true for North America. The largest tabletop gaming convention. New York Comic Con is the largest comic convention, and Anime Expo in Los Angeles is the largest anime and manga and Japanese pop culture convention. And if you notice, just the numbers are way bigger than you might than what you're getting in library conventions. And you're talking to the people that have immediate influence and the people that are going to be going to the ballots and voting on library funding or going to your library board meetings, people that are voting for library board members, or your local legislature. So these are all, and the good news is also that when you look around, you will find a lot of different events of different sizes. So, I mean, if you think about just in New York, there are enormous ones like New York Comic Con. There are very small local neighborhood conventions. There are, it runs the gamut. So these are some of the some of the biggest ones, but you don't have to worry about attending something that has 200,000 people in it. You can start small if you want to. So there's all sorts of fan conventions or things you might not expect. Most of us I think are pretty familiar with things like comic conventions or anime conventions. There are gaming conventions. There are conventions just for video games, conventions just for analog or tabletop games, RPGs, or mix. There are conventions that just do gaming in general. There are a lot of conventions for fans of certain types of genre literature, sci-fi and fantasy, romance, horror is a big one. There are, local zine conventions and festivals. These are great places for the library to get involved in. And of course, there's obviously like Star Trek conventions and Disney conventions where it's very focused on a certain media property, and they carry, and then that sort of runs the gamut covers a lot of different types of media. And there are some conventions that cover sort of everything. So like AwesomeCon in Washington, D.C., has a little bit of everything. It has comic professionals and anime and manga stuff. It has gaming and books and artist alleys and all sorts of things. So, and as you can see from the picture here, there's even a Garfield convention that is biannual if you're interested in that. So what to consider when choosing what con to go to. Big thing obviously is going to be your cost. A big thing with these is that, even if your institution normally reimburses you for traveling for professional, conferences, they may not cover the cost of these. So be aware. The good news is that because there are so many of them, if you choose a local one, there's probably going to be very minimal cost for travel or lodging because it might just be a quick trip out. And a lot of these, if you are selected to present a program at these conventions, you will generally get free admission for the whole entire event. That's been my experience with both FlameCon and AwesomeCon, and I know at least New York Comic Con also works the same way. If you're presenting, you get a full pass. Think about what the focus of these conventions is going to be. If there is a heavy media focus, that's an easy way to connect to library topics. Is your program going to directly or indirectly talk about intellectual freedom issues? So for example, you could do an entire program on personal privacy, on dating your personal privacy. You could do something on, talking about what the, current titles, current and new titles that that you're carrying at the library. And then also mention, if a new, challenge policy, and then how is that policy keeping, protecting the right to read for everyone. Again, like I said, attendees, again, we're talking to members of the public. They are already invested in the topic. So if you can connect your, what you are presenting on intellectual freedom to this topic, you have an easy in with these attendees. Think about what kind of, how are you going to present this? Is it going to be, like I said, is it going to be a presentation? Is it going to be a panel? Are you going to do an activity? Is your library going to have a booth? And then at the booth, maybe talk about, protecting the freedom to read as part of your display at the booth. All sort of things to think about. And finally, think about policies. Think about is your presentation going to be recorded? That's something that is important, especially if you are in a community that is already divided on the subject of book bans and book challenges. What is the harassment policy of the convention? If word gets out among some of these groups that you are going to be presenting on this topic, and there is already an organized group that is trying to present their view of these things, what steps can the convention do to keep you safe and keep you protected in case these groups come and try to harass you or heckle you at your presentation? And finally, be aware that if you work at a public library, if you're a school librarian at a public school, or if you work at a public college or university, you fall under the Hatch Act, which means you cannot take, which restricts you in certain things of what you can or cannot say in terms of appearing to endorse or attack partisan candidates. So just be aware of that. Be aware of what you can and can't say in public, especially if your presentation is going to be recorded. So finally, when choosing your topic, again, you want it to be immediately relevant to attendees. So if you're at a general pop culture convention and you want to talk about things like academic freedom in academic libraries, that might not be the best fit for that particular venue. You might find a way to make it work. But in general, these fan conventions are going to want you to tie into the theme in some way. Do you have any existing library programming that you can use? So like I mentioned, again, if you have a library program on ways on safe searching and protecting personal data while you're online, that is a great thing that you can bring to one of these conventions that will feel sort of immediately relevant, and you can sort of theme it around being a personal privacy superhero or something like that. Make sure you're bringing facts and stories, and be sure that your presentation is geared at multiple demographics. That remember, this is the general public. Not everyone, if you start talking about, people need to see themselves and feel validated by books. That type of language is going to speak to a certain demographic and is going to bounce off of another demographic that might respond more to the book challenges of the type that we are seeing are imposing on citizens' personal freedom to choose. Something like I joked that it's not just like librarians talking to librarians about the library. It can also sometimes at these library conventions feel like liberals talking to progressives about leftism. And so you have to make sure that your messaging, isn't just coming at it from a certain point of view, but making sure that you're able to talk to people who are more conservative, people who are libertarian, because there is a broad support for libraries out there, and you need to craft your message that you are hitting multiple demographics when you are giving your presentation. Don't undercut one group, but at the same time, make sure that you are talking to everybody. And finally, be prepared for hard questions. There are people in your community that are going to have a view of what is happening at the library that has been warped, that has been distorted by the messaging that is coming out of these groups. So you have to be aware if you get a question about, well, what about, pornographic materials in the library? Make sure you know how to respond to those type of questions. Whether it's, we're kind of used to thinking of these challenges that have come out as coming from a place of bad faith. And I think on the institutional level, these groups that are behind these organizations, I believe, are operating in bad faith. That doesn't mean that everybody who is hearing their messaging and is being convinced is. So be aware that you have to, like I said, you have to be able to talk to people. And finally, crafting your call to action. And so for your call to action, I kind of want you to do two things. One, something immediate. At the end of your presentation, you should be asking people attending your program to do something right away. It could be as simple as taking a piece of branded swag, a bookmark with Unite Against Book Bans on it, or a link to every library. It could be taking a survey or giving feedback. It could be asking them to sign up for a newsletter, or it could be pointing them at some of these campaigns, like United Against Book Bans, Every Library, PEN America, Freedom to Read Foundation, all these groups. And then also plant the seeds of something long-term. The Merit Fund, if you can solicit donations for that, or for any of these other groups that are working against the book bans. Get them, remind them to vote, that their voice matters. If they are upset by what they are seeing in your presentation, remind them that the most important thing they can do is to, express their opinions by voting, by talking to their representatives. And finally, a long-term thing, but, plant that seed and see what happens. Encourage people to run for their school or library boards. That this is a crucial way that they can work towards helping to protect the freedom to read, the freedom to access information, intellectual freedom for everybody in their community. So that is the end of my presentation. That is my email address. And
Glen,
yes.
Glenn, I really appreciate the presentation. Had a lot of participants, 115 right now, and a couple of the questions focused on availability of your materials. Tom asked about the slides, if these slides will be available, and Susan wanted to know the same thing. So those were the big theme, is availability of some of your materials. So would you be able to answer that?
Oh, yes. If you just send me an email at that email address that's right on your screen right there, and I will send it to them. My slides have in the notes, they have links to sources that I consulted. There was a really good programming librarian blog post on reasons to have for your library to have a booth at a local convention. Though that link is in the notes on the slides too. Yeah, so just send me an email, and I'll send you the slides. Yeah.
And there's some other, mostly just comments, and some really good comments, by the way. A lot of echoing what you've been talking about. A few people talking about the cost of travel and the cost of conventions. But no, I think that was it for the direct questions. But how do you deal with some of the issues like cost of securing funding for travel or for entrance to the conventions?
So in terms of like I said, for in my experience, for the like pop culture convention stuff, the cost of admission is, if you are doing the presentation and they accept it and it is part of their programming, you will get a comped ticket. Both FlameCon and AwesomeCon did this, and like I said, I believe New York Comic Con also did the same thing. Whereas, for example, the ones that I'm doing this summer, my tickets for both of those conventions were free. Whereas I'm also presenting at ALA Annual, and all I did was knock like $100 off the admission. So in general, with these fan conventions, presenting at them will give you a free ticket. And for me, and for both of the ones that I've done, it was for the whole convention. So AwesomeCon is 3 days. I got a 3-day ticket, even though I'm only presenting on 1 day.
Thank you very much, Glenn. That's really good information to know.
Yeah, and a lot of these there are so many of these that there is probably one local to you. So if you don't feel like, for example, I'm flying out to New York to do FlameCon, I would have done it anyway, because that's a show that I really enjoyed going to. I started going when I was at working in Albany. So for me, I was already going, and so this felt like and because it's a much smaller convention, it felt like an easy way, an easy in, because I was already familiar with the show, and I knew I wasn't going to get like, an auditorium full of people, and it was going to be people that were really already invested in the topic, because if you're at a queer convention, you're going to be very receptive to hearing about ways that we can stop this sort of like anti-queer censorship that's happening in our libraries. So that's something that, and then I'm going to AwesomeCon, which is in DC. I live in DC, so that is generally, and again, it's also a show that I've been to several years prior to this. There are conventions of, big ones, small ones. I realize if you're in a very rural area, you might need to drive out to your local medium-sized city. The one thing you may also want to consider is, can your library, create or host its own? There are libraries that have done that. The only thing about that is beware of using the term Comic-Con, as Comic-Con is a trademark. So like, I know there are places that have been like Library Comic-Con. You can't call that, unfortunately. But that may be something to look into, local artists, local creators, partner with, if you have like a comic book store in your area, if you have a used bookstore or something else that, if you have like local public-private partners that you can team up with to create your own event, that's another option too.
Yeah, that's really good advice about the using or not using the Comic-Con label. It's almost like the prohibition on using the word Super Bowl.
Yes, it is
the big game.
Yeah. Double check that again. I believe that is the case. But I do know that there has been things where like libraries have tried to create their own convention, and we're told they had to change the name because they used Comic-Con. So.
Well, we had Cynthia and Jason and Heather all left some really good comments, not questions, just informational comments. So I encourage everyone to check out the chat for the things that have been shared throughout the presentation. And thank you again, Glenn. This is fascinating. And here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, I'm going to make sure to get to the next convention that happens either here or nearby.
All right. Well, that is great to hear. And really glad everybody a chance to come out to this session, and hope everybody has a great rest of this convention.
Thank you very much.
And I will stop recording now.
All right.